The courtroom was alive with the low hum of voices, the shuffle of papers, and the occasional creak of wooden benches under shifting weight. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, falling in golden stripes across the polished floor. Everyone seemed important here, dressed in dark suits, dresses, and polished shoes. But in the back corner, unnoticed by most, a small figure moved quietly. His uniform was faded, his shoes worn. He was the janitor, sweeping and dusting with careful, deliberate movements. He moved like a shadow, quiet, unassuming, almost invisible. Yet his eyes were alert, sharp, and full of a quiet intelligence that no one could see at first glance. The judge, a tall man with a commanding presence and a voice that could fill the room, sat behind the bench. His robe hung heavy around him, and his gavel gleamed in the sunlight. He scanned the room, then his gaze fell on the janitor. A smirk formed on his face, sharp and cruel. "Well, well," the judge said, his voice dripping with condescension, "if it isn't our humble janitor. Sweeping the floor while the important work goes on above. Tell me, do you even understand what is happening here?" The room stilled for a moment, the question hanging in the air. The janitor did not stop his work. He kept sweeping, slow and steady, as if the words did not reach him. But his eyes narrowed slightly, watching every move, listening to every word. There was a tension, like the quiet before a storm. The judge chuckled, louder this time, a sound that filled the room and made people glance at the janitor. "Do you even know what the Constitution says?" he asked, leaning forward, hands gripping the edge of the bench. "Do you know the laws that guide this country? Or are you too busy mopping the floors to care about justice, honor, and the law itself?" Laughter erupted from the spectators. Lawyers leaned back in their chairs, smiling at the spectacle. Some whispered to each other, shaking their heads. The janitor did not react. He continued his sweeping, slow, precise movements. But inside, his heart beat steadily, controlled, his mind alert. He knew every word of the Constitution. Every article, every amendment, every line. He had memorized it not for fame or recognition, but because it mattered to him. The principles of fairness, equality, and justice were more important than any title or salary. The judge's voice grew louder, sharper, cutting through the murmurs. "I dare you," he said, pointing a finger, "to speak. Tell me, janitor, can you even quote the law? Can you even say one line of the Constitution without fumbling like a fool?" The room fell quieter now, a low hum of curiosity replacing the laughter. Everyone's attention turned to the janitor. Even the lawyers paused, pens hovering above notepads. There was something in the way he stood there, quiet and steady, that demanded attention. The janitor straightened slightly. He took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. Then, in a voice calm but strong, he said, "I can. I know the Constitution. I know it word for word." A ripple of surprise moved through the courtroom. Some gasped, some laughed nervously, unsure if he was serious. The judge's smirk faltered slightly, replaced by curiosity mixed with disbelief. "You," he asked, almost incredulous. "You, a janitor, know the Constitution word for word? Come now, do not play games." The janitor set down his broom. Slowly, deliberately, he walked toward the center of the courtroom. Each step was measured, confident. His back was straight, his eyes steady. He stopped a few feet from the judge, looked around at the spectators, and then spoke again. "All people," he began, "are created equal. They are endowed with certain rights that cannot be taken away. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." His voice was clear, each word pronounced carefully. The room held its breath. The judge leaned forward, frowning. This was unexpected. The janitor continued, not hesitating. "The Constitution ensures justice, protects liberty, and guides the laws of this land. It is not written for the rich or the powerful alone. It belongs to everyone, and every word must be honored. No person is above the law." Silence fell across the room. The laughter had vanished. Lawyers and spectators alike were staring, eyes wide, mouths slightly open. The judge's hand gripped the bench, knuckles white. He tried to speak, but the janitor's voice filled the room, steady, unyielding. He walked slowly, turning slightly to address the audience, not just the judge. Article 1, Section 8, he continued, gives Congress the power to make laws necessary and proper for carrying out its duties. Article 2 outlines the powers of the President. The amendments protect our freedoms, our rights, and our dignity. Every word matters. Every word is binding. A few people in the courtroom whispered to each other. Some shook their heads, unable to believe what they were hearing. Others leaned forward, eyes glued to the janitor. He was ordinary, yes, a janitor, dressed in simple clothes, with worn shoes. But his words, his knowledge, his presence, it was extraordinary. The judge cleared his throat, trying to regain control. That is impressive, I admit, he said, carefully, but can you apply this knowledge? Can you answer questions about the law, about cases, about interpretations? The janitor nodded. Yes. I can. Knowledge is not about titles. It is about learning, understanding, and remembering. The law is not a secret for the elite. It belongs to everyone. I have studied it every day, every hour I could spare. I know it because it is right, because it matters, because it protects people like me, like everyone here. A murmur of approval ran through the audience. Some lawyers exchanged glances, impressed despite themselves. The judge leaned back, frowning, a mixture of pride and embarrassment in his expression. He had mocked the janitor, belittled him, and now he realized he had misjudged him entirely. The janitor paused. His eyes scanned the room, taking in the reactions. Some were shocked, some amazed, some still skeptical. He did not care about approval. He cared about truth. He cared about justice. He spoke again, voice rising slightly, filled with conviction. The Constitution is not a piece of paper. It is not words on a wall. It is the voice of the people, the guide for fairness, the shield for the weak and the ordinary. To ignore it, to mock it, is to betray justice itself. Every word I speak is from that sacred document. Every word is true. And every person in this room, including you, sir, he said, looking directly at the judge, must remember that no one is above the law, not even those who wear robes or sit in high chairs. The courtroom was silent now. Even the reporters, pens poised, waited. Every eye was on the janitor. Every heart in the room seemed to beat in rhythm with his words. The judge's face was pale. He opened his mouth, then closed it. He wanted to interrupt, to challenge, to humiliate. But the words, the certainty, the knowledge of this man held him back. The janitor took a step back, bowing his head slightly, not in submission, but in respect for the law itself. The gavel rested on the bench, untouched, as the room absorbed the moment. This was not a performance. This was not arrogance. This was truth, spoken with calm authority. A lawyer finally whispered, almost to himself, I have never heard anyone speak like this in my life. Another added, he knows every word, every single word. The janitor returned to his broom, picking it up gently. But now, he was no longer invisible. The room had seen him. The judge had seen him. The Constitution had been spoken aloud, by someone the world had dismissed as unworthy, and the impact was seismic. The judge looked at him, a quiet respect forming, though he would never admit it openly. You may continue, he said finally, voice low, almost trembling. The janitor nodded, sweeping slowly, deliberately, but his eyes met the judge's. There was no mockery, no challenge. There was understanding now, a silent recognition that knowledge, courage, and truth could come from anywhere, from anyone. The courtroom whispered again, this time in awe. And in that quiet, the janitor worked, cleaning the floor, but leaving a mark far greater than any dirt or dust, a mark of truth, courage, and the power of simple, unwavering knowledge. The courtroom seemed to hold its breath, as if the walls themselves were waiting to hear what would happen next. The janitor had returned to his broom, but the energy in the room had changed. What had once been laughter and mockery had turned into a strange mix of curiosity, disbelief, and growing respect. Still, the judge was not ready to give up his dominance. He leaned forward, his robe shifting with the motion, and looked down at the janitor with an expression that blended amusement with irritation. Well, the judge said, his voice sharp, cutting through the tense silence, you've spoken some words you probably don't even understand. You claim to know the Constitution. You claim to understand the law. But words alone do not make you wise. Tell me, janitor, can you interpret them? Can you explain their meaning? Or will you crumble under simple questioning? Some of the spectators chuckled quietly, but there was nervousness in their laughter. They had been watching a man they had dismissed as insignificant suddenly command the attention of an entire courtroom. Lawyers shifted in their seats, uncomfortable now, realizing that this simple janitor might actually know far more than anyone had guessed. The janitor paused, his hands resting lightly on his broom. His eyes met the judge's, unwavering. He did not flinch, did not hesitate. I can explain, he said simply, his voice calm but firm. And I will. The Constitution is not just words. It is guidance. It is protection. It is law for every citizen, every worker, every man, woman, and child in this country. It is not a toy for the powerful or the elite to twist as they please. It is a shield for everyone, including those who sweep the floors you mock. A ripple of murmurs ran through the audience. Some gasped audibly. Others whispered to each other. The judge's face reddened, his smirk fading. This was no longer a harmless joke. The janitor was not merely quoting the law, he was speaking truth. And it was a truth that cut deeper than any insult, deeper than any power the judge could command. Enough talk, the judge barked, pounding the bench with his gavel. If you think words will impress me, you are mistaken. Tell me then, janitor, what is your understanding of the First Amendment? Can you recite it? Can you tell me its limits, its power? The janitor nodded, stepping forward again. His voice was steady, unwavering, filling the room with authority that no one expected from a man in a janitor's uniform. The First Amendment guarantees freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom of religion, and the right to assemble peacefully. It protects all people, not just the rich or educated. It allows dissent, discussion, and debate. And it ensures that no person, no matter how powerful, can silence the voice of the people. A hush fell over the courtroom. The judge opened his mouth, but no words came. The janitor's clarity and conviction held the room in silence. He did not speak to challenge the judge's authority, he spoke to present the truth. And in that truth, there was power that no robe, no gavel, and no title could suppress. The lawyers exchanged glances, some looking uneasy, others amazed. One young attorney whispered to his colleague, I've never heard anyone explain it so clearly. Not even the professors at law school. The janitor's eyes scanned the room, taking in the reactions. He could feel the tension, the disbelief, the slowly growing respect. He knew that what he was doing was dangerous, in a way. A man of power had mocked him, humiliated him publicly, and he had dared to speak back with knowledge. But he also knew that truth carried its own protection. And the truth he spoke was not just for himself, it was for everyone who had ever been dismissed, underestimated, or ignored. Now, the judge said finally, trying to regain control, his voice tight, if you truly understand the law, then tell me, what are the limitations of the Second Amendment? Can you explain it without contradicting yourself? The janitor smiled faintly, a calm, patient smile. The Second Amendment protects the right of the people to keep and bear arms. But it also exists within the framework of society. Rights come with responsibility. The Constitution does not allow chaos. It does not protect harm to others. Every amendment, every article, every law exists within balance. Rights are not absolute when they threaten the rights of others. Some of the lawyers leaned forward now, pens forgotten, listening. Spectators murmured softly. The courtroom had transformed. Where once there had been mockery and derision, there was now awe and attention. The janitor's words were simple, direct, and yet profound. They were words that reminded everyone that knowledge was not tied to wealth, position, or appearance. Knowledge could reside in anyone, even in a man who cleaned the floors silently every day. The judge's face was pale, a mixture of anger and embarrassment showing through. He had intended to humiliate this man, to remind him of his place. Instead, he found himself confronted with knowledge and wisdom he had never anticipated. His hand tightened on the gavel, but he did not strike it. The words of the janitor had taken control of the room in a way that nothing else could. The janitor continued, stepping closer to the bench. You may sit in that chair, Judge. You may wear that robe. You may strike your gavel and command attention. But knowledge does not come from a seat of power. Knowledge comes from study, from observation, from care. And respect is earned, not demanded. There was a pause. The judge opened his mouth, then closed it again. He wanted to speak, to dismiss, to regain authority, but the janitor's calm, unyielding tone held him silent. The power in the room had shifted. It was no longer the judge who commanded attention. It was the janitor, a man who had been invisible moments ago, now standing at the center of everyone's focus. The spectators leaned forward. Some whispered among themselves, others simply stared. The janitor did not flinch. He did not seek applause or recognition. He sought only to present the truth, clearly, simply, and firmly. Every word he spoke reminded the room that arrogance could be challenged, that wisdom could be found in unexpected places, and that justice could not be ignored. The judge finally spoke, his voice low, almost hesitant. You speak well," he said. "But knowledge is not enough. Can you apply this? Can you answer questions about cases, about law, about judgments?" The janitor nodded. "Yes. I can. Knowledge without application is useless. The law must be understood, interpreted, and applied fairly. That is why every citizen must know their rights. That is why we must all respect the principles of justice." The room was silent once more. The janitor had turned what was meant to be a moment of humiliation into a lesson for everyone present. He had shown courage, patience, and intelligence. He had reminded the judge and everyone in the room that true knowledge could not be mocked, and true courage could not be ignored. A young reporter in the back whispered, almost to himself, "I came here to witness a joke. Instead, I've witnessed a masterclass in courage and knowledge." Another added, he's incredible. And he's just a janitor." The janitor picked up his broom again, sweeping slowly, deliberately. But the energy in the room had shifted irreversibly. Where there had been mockery, there was now respect. Where there had been derision, there was now awe. And in the eyes of the judge, something subtle had changed: embarrassment, realization, and the quiet beginning of respect. He spoke one last time before retreating to the corner. "The law belongs to all of us," he said softly, yet firmly. "Do not forget that. Even those who clean your floors, even those you dismiss, have a voice. And every voice matters." The courtroom remained silent. Every person, from the most powerful lawyer to the lowliest clerk, had felt the weight of his words. The janitor, once invisible, had reminded them all of the true meaning of knowledge, courage, and dignity. The judge's gavel rested untouched. For the first time that day, he did not strike it. He did not need to. The janitor had spoken, and the impact was undeniable. The laughter was gone. The mockery had been silenced. And in that quiet, the janitor had left a mark that no one would soon forget, a mark of courage, truth, and the quiet power of knowledge. The courtroom had fallen into a silence so heavy it felt like the air itself was holding its breath. Every eye was on the janitor. His broom rested lightly in his hands, but he did not move. He stood there, a small figure in a sea of authority and formality, yet somehow, he had captured the attention of everyone. The judge, who had moments ago mocked him openly, now sat frozen, leaning slightly forward, his gavel untouched. The spectators, lawyers, and clerks all watched with a mix of awe, disbelief, and growing respect. The janitor's words had pierced through the layers of arrogance and self-importance that filled the room. People whispered quietly to each other, trying to understand what they had just witnessed. Some shook their heads in astonishment. Others leaned forward, gripping their benches tightly, as if holding onto him for guidance. The janitor's eyes swept across the room. He did not speak immediately. He let the silence stretch, letting it sink in. The judge's frown deepened. His cheeks burned slightly, a flush of embarrassment and perhaps the faintest hint of admiration. He had thought himself untouchable in his authority. He had thought he could belittle this man, dismiss him, and leave the courtroom amused. But the janitor had done the impossible. He had silenced everyone, not with force, not with anger, but with truth. Finally, the janitor spoke, his voice calm yet commanding. The Constitution is not a decoration. It is not a tool for personal pride or arrogance. It is a living guide. It protects the weak, the ordinary, and the overlooked. Every citizen has rights. Every citizen has responsibilities. And every person, regardless of their station in life, deserves respect. A few people gasped. Some leaned forward, mouths slightly open. The judge's hand twitched near his gavel, but he did not strike it. He could feel the weight of the janitor's words pressing down on him. He had mocked a man he had assumed was insignificant. And now, he could feel the shame creeping in, the realization that he had misjudged someone based solely on appearances. The janitor took a slow step forward, placing his broom carefully against the wall. He straightened his back, lifting his chin slightly. "I am not here to challenge you personally," he said. "I am here to speak the truth. Knowledge is not bound by titles. Respect is not earned by arrogance. And wisdom is not limited to those in high positions. True understanding can come from anyone who seeks it, who studies it, and who values it." The courtroom was so silent that one could hear the faint scratch of a pen, the whisper of a page turning, the small creak of a chair. Everyone was listening. The janitor's words had transformed the room. What had been mockery had become revelation. What had been laughter had become awe. People who had once doubted him now hung on every syllable, realizing that knowledge, courage, and conviction could appear in the most unexpected form. The judge finally found his voice, though it was quieter than before. You speak well," he said, his tone strained. "But understanding the law is different from applying it. Can you do more than recite words? Can you interpret them? Can you explain them in practice?" The janitor nodded. "Yes," he replied. "The law is alive. It guides action. It protects and it punishes when necessary. Knowledge is only valuable if it can be applied to real situations, to defend the innocent, to challenge injustice, to maintain fairness. Words alone are empty. Understanding gives them power." He turned slightly, addressing the audience now, not just the judge. Every citizen must know their rights. Every citizen must speak when truth is challenged. Silence allows injustice to grow. Humility allows arrogance to dominate. And courage, no matter how small or unexpected the source, can change everything. The spectators whispered among themselves, their voices hushed but filled with admiration. Some shook their heads in disbelief. A few wiped their eyes, moved not by spectacle, but by the simple, undeniable truth of his words. The janitor, a man they had once ignored, had become the teacher of the entire courtroom. The judge's face was pale, his pride wounded, but something deeper had shifted. He realized that authority without wisdom was hollow. That mocking the humble and ordinary was dangerous. That knowledge could not be contained by status, salary, or uniform. His voice, when it came, was quieter, controlled, almost reverent. You have impressed everyone," he said. "But tell me, how did you learn all of this?" The janitor smiled faintly, a calm, serene smile that carried no arrogance. "Through observation, study, and respect," he said. "I have listened to lawyers, read books, and memorized the Constitution because it matters to me. Because truth matters to me. And because justice must be known by everyone, not just the powerful." The courtroom remained still. Some people whispered quietly, "He is incredible," others nodded, unable to hide their amazement. The judge's gavel sat untouched. He had intended to control the room, to assert his authority, but now he could only watch, silent and humbled. The janitor continued, his voice growing stronger, more passionate, yet never loud or arrogant. "Knowledge is not a privilege. It is a right. Respect is not a demand. It is earned. And courage comes in many forms. Sometimes it comes from those with titles.
Sometimes it comes from those you never expect.
Sometimes it comes from those who sweep your floors quietly, day after day, unnoticed, yet observing everything. Some lawyers shifted uncomfortably, realizing that they had underestimated him. Some students who had come to observe the courtroom felt inspired, seeing a man who proved that dedication, intelligence, and courage were not determined by appearance or position. The judge cleared his throat, finally standing slightly. His voice was quieter now, but with a hint of respect. Perhaps I misjudged you," he admitted, almost under his breath.
"Perhaps I underestimated what a single person can know, what a single person can teach."
The janitor nodded slightly, his eyes kind but firm.
"We all have something to teach, if we are willing to listen.
And we all have something to learn, if we are willing to observe."
Mockery silences learning. Respect encourages it. Understanding changes everything.
The spectators felt a strange energy in the room, a mixture of awe and reflection. The laughter, the mockery, and the casual arrogance had vanished. In their place was silence, heavy but not uncomfortable.
It was the silence of realization, of acknowledgement, and of respect.
The janitor picked up his broom again, sweeping slowly and methodically, but he no longer moved as a background figure. Every movement he made carried weight, meaning, and authority.
The audience understood now: the ordinary could be extraordinary. The humble could be wise.
And courage and knowledge were not limited to titles, uniforms, or wealth. A young clerk whispered to the person next to him, "I thought I knew everything about law, but he knows more than I ever will."
Another nodded, whispering back, "And he isn't asking for praise. He just speaks the truth."
The judge watched, silent. For the first time, he saw clearly the man he had mocked.
The janitor was not just a custodian of the courtroom floors.
He was a custodian of truth, knowledge, and courage.
And the judge knew, deep inside, that he had much to learn from him.
The janitor spoke once more, softly, yet firmly, so that everyone could hear. "Remember, the law belongs to everyone.
Knowledge belongs to everyone. Courage belongs to everyone. Do not dismiss anyone. Do not mock anyone.
And never forget that the most powerful words are those spoken with truth, humility, and respect."
The courtroom remained silent, absorbing his words, letting them sink in. Even the reporters, pens poised, did not write.
They listened, captivated, moved by the simplicity and power of his truth. The judge leaned back slightly, pale and thoughtful, realizing that the humiliation he had intended had turned into a lesson he would never forget. The janitor returned to the corner, picking up his cleaning supplies. But he no longer seemed invisible. Everyone had seen him. Everyone had heard him. And everyone had felt the weight of his words.
The silence lingered, deep and profound. It was the silence of recognition, the silence of awe, and the silence of understanding. The janitor had turned mockery into a lesson. He had turned derision into respect. And in that quiet, the courtroom had changed, forever. The courtroom was still. The air was heavy with anticipation, as if everyone knew that something remarkable was about to unfold. The janitor had returned to his corner, sweeping quietly, yet his presence dominated the room. The judge, his pride still bruised, straightened in his chair. He had intended to humiliate this man, to remind him of his place, but the janitor's calm, precise, and unwavering knowledge had turned the entire courtroom upside down. Now, he had no choice but to test him. The judge's voice was sharp, commanding, as he addressed the janitor directly. "Very well," he said. "If you truly know the Constitution, if you truly understand the law, then let us see it applied. Tell me, what would you do in a case where the rights of one citizen clash with the rights of another? Explain clearly, and do not rely on generalities. I want specifics. Can you do that?" The janitor paused, his broom resting against the wall. He did not flinch, did not hesitate. His eyes met the judge's, steady and unwavering. "Yes," he said simply. "Rights exist to protect everyone. But no right is absolute if it harms another. The law exists to balance freedom with responsibility. In a case where rights conflict, the Constitution provides guidance, precedence, and interpretation.
Every action must respect the rights of both parties, seeking justice, fairness, and the least harm possible.
A murmur ran through the audience. Lawyers leaned forward, pens momentarily forgotten.
Spectators whispered in astonishment.
The room had shifted again. Where mockery had once ruled, understanding and respect now prevailed.
The judge's frown deepened. He wanted to challenge the janitor further, to test him publicly, but there was hesitation in his voice.
He cleared his throat.
"Very well," he said.
"Let us make this more specific.
Imagine a case where someone's freedom of speech conflicts with another person's right to safety. One threatens violence, the other protests peacefully.
How would you handle that?"
The janitor took a slow step forward, his voice calm, measured, but growing stronger. "Freedom of speech is essential," he said.
"It protects dissent, debate, and expression.
But it is not unlimited. Threats, intimidation, and violence are not protected. In this case, the peaceful protesters' rights must be protected, and the threat must be addressed through law, investigation, and accountability.
Balance is key. Protection of all citizens is the priority. The Constitution guides this balance."
A lawyer in the back whispered to a colleague, He's answering perfectly. Not only does he know the words, but he understands them."
Another nodded, wide-eyed. "I've never seen this before, not even in law school."
The judge's eyes narrowed. He leaned forward, gripping the bench.
"Oof. That is all very neat in theory. But let us see if you can handle practice. Here is another scenario. A company discriminates against an employee based on religion. The law is clear. What recourse does the employee have? And what legal principles apply?"
The janitor did not hesitate. The employee has the right to file a complaint, seek justice through legal channels, and hold the company accountable. The law protects against discrimination, and courts are guided by both the Constitution and statutory law.
Legal precedent ensures fairness and consistency. Rights must be enforced, and accountability is essential. Justice is not optional."
The courtroom was silent, every word hanging in the air.
The judge's hand tightened slightly, his jaw firm.
He could feel the power of knowledge before him, and yet he would not admit it openly.
The audience, however, was captivated.
They had witnessed a janitor, once invisible, answering questions that would challenge even the most experienced lawyers.
And he did so calmly, confidently, and accurately.
The judge leaned back, trying to mask his frustration with authority. "You are well-spoken," he said cautiously.
"But let us see if you can apply reasoning to constitutional amendments. Tell me, if an amendment protects one right but appears to conflict with another, how should it be interpreted?"
The janitor's eyes flickered slightly, but his voice remained steady.
"All amendments must be interpreted in context," he said. "No amendment exists in isolation. Courts examine the Constitution as a whole, considering intent, precedent, and fairness. Conflicts are resolved by balancing rights, protecting the core principles of justice, and ensuring equality.
The goal is not to favor one over another, but to maintain the integrity of the law for everyone."
A gasp ran through the courtroom. Lawyers exchanged glances, some wide-eyed, others whispering in disbelief. Spectators murmured, leaning forward, unable to hide their astonishment.
The judge's smirk had vanished completely. His attempts to intimidate, to challenge, to embarrass the janitor had failed.
Every question was answered with precision, understanding, and dignity. The judge's voice dropped, almost involuntarily.
"You seem to understand this better than many of our trained attorneys," he admitted.
"Tell me, how did you gain this knowledge?"
The janitor smiled faintly, serene and calm. "By listening, observing, reading, and learning every day," he said simply. "I did not need a title to understand the law.
I needed curiosity, discipline, and respect for truth. Knowledge is not limited to classrooms or credentials. It belongs to anyone willing to seek it." A young clerk whispered, I can't believe it. He's just a janitor." Another nodded, eyes wide. "But he knows more than anyone here.
The judge leaned forward again, voice firm but slightly humbler now. "One final test," he said.
"If a law is applied unfairly by someone in power, and it harms the innocent, what recourse exists? Explain precisely, using constitutional principles." The janitor straightened, his voice steady, unwavering, filled with authority yet humility. "The Constitution provides checks and balances," he said. "Courts exist to correct errors, protect rights, and ensure justice. No person in power is beyond accountability. The people can petition, appeal, and seek legal remedies. Laws applied unfairly must be challenged, corrected, and, if necessary, reversed. Justice is maintained not by fear, but by adherence to principle and vigilance by citizens." A hushed awe filled the room. Lawyers, spectators, even court clerks were staring. The judge's face was pale, a mixture of frustration and reluctant admiration. He realized, slowly, that this man, this janitor, who had been dismissed, mocked, and ignored, was demonstrating understanding far beyond what he had imagined. The janitor took a deep breath, looking around the courtroom. "Do not mistake my occupation for ignorance," he said softly, yet clearly. "Knowledge is not bound by position, salary, or uniform. Respect is not earned by mockery or titles. Courage, wisdom, and truth can come from anywhere, even from those you least expect. Remember this, for it is the law, and it is justice." The courtroom remained silent, but the energy had shifted. The judge, who had once mocked and belittled him, now leaned back, subdued. The audience, previously filled with skepticism and amusement, now watched with admiration and awe. The janitor had faced every challenge, answered every test, and emerged not only knowledgeable but respected. He returned to his corner, sweeping slowly, deliberately, but with a new air of authority. Every step, every motion, carried weight. The courtroom had changed. The laughter was gone. The arrogance had been tempered. And the lesson was clear: true knowledge, courage, and respect cannot be challenged by mockery alone. Even the judge, though silent, felt the shift. He had witnessed a man of ordinary appearance display extraordinary understanding. He had seen humility outshine arrogance, and truth triumph over dismissiveness. And he knew, deep inside, that this day would be remembered, not for him, not for his gavel, but for the janitor who had shown the true meaning of knowledge and courage. The courtroom had settled into a tense quiet. The janitor stood near the corner, his broom in hand, yet his presence filled the room more than any robe or suit ever could. His knowledge had silenced mockery, commanded attention, and shifted the energy of everyone present. But beneath the calm, measured exterior, there was a story no one knew, a story that explained why this man, so ordinary in appearance, held extraordinary wisdom. As whispers filled the back benches, the judge, still pale and subdued, leaned forward. He had attempted to humiliate this man, to expose what he assumed was ignorance, and had been proven wrong at every step. The judge's voice was quiet, almost hesitant. You speak with remarkable clarity and understanding. Tell me, how did you learn all of this? Who taught you?" The janitor's eyes softened slightly, a distant look appearing, as if he was peering into another time, another place. "No one taught me formally," he said. "I was not born into privilege. I was not sent to the best schools. My family, we had very little. But my parents, especially my father, believed that knowledge was power, and that understanding the world was a responsibility for everyone." The courtroom leaned in, caught by the unexpected intimacy of his words. Spectators whispered quietly, leaning forward. Lawyers paused, pens frozen above paper. Even the judge, who had intended to intimidate, felt a curious stirring of respect. "My father was a teacher," the janitor continued, his voice steady, rich with emotion. "He could not afford to teach many, but he taught me at home. He showed me books, explained history, and told me stories of justice. He said, even if the world ignores you, even if they mock you, always know the law, always know what is right. I promised him that I would remember. I promised him that knowledge would never leave me, even if I had to sweep floors to survive." A few spectators murmured softly, their expressions shifting from curiosity to empathy. The janitor's calm, quiet demeanor had hidden the depth of his past, but now, the audience could feel the weight of his life, the sacrifices, and the unyielding determination that had shaped him. My mother, he said, voice a little softer now, taught me patience. She would remind me that courage is not loud, that wisdom is often quiet, and that respect is earned through understanding, not by showing power. Every day, I studied. Every day, I learned. Every day, I held on to the lessons they gave me. And though life forced me into humble work, I never forgot what they taught me. I never stopped learning. I never stopped believing in the power of knowledge and truth. The judge's hand rested on the bench, his fingers tightening slightly. He had been challenged, humiliated in a way he had never anticipated, and now he was witnessing the humanity, the story behind the man he had dismissed so easily. The courtroom, too, was silent in a different way. This was no longer just a legal battle of knowledge, it was a human story, emotional, powerful, and deeply moving. A young clerk whispered to the person next to him, I can't believe it. He's lived a life of hardship and still knows so much. The other nodded, eyes wide, unable to hide the mixture of awe and respect. The janitor continued, his voice stronger now, carrying not just knowledge, but conviction. I am not here to show off. I am not here to boast. I am here because justice matters. I am here because truth matters. I am here because the Constitution is not just words. It is life. It protects us all. And it is our duty, every citizen, every person, to know it, respect it, and uphold it. The judge swallowed, his pride battling with a deep, undeniable realization. He had mocked a man he assumed was insignificant, only to find himself confronted with someone whose life, experience, and knowledge surpassed many who wore suits and carried diplomas. He felt a flicker of embarrassment, but also an emerging respect. The janitor paused, letting his words settle. He reached down, picking up a small, worn notebook from his pocket. He opened it carefully, showing pages filled with neat handwriting, notes, and underlined passages of the Constitution. I have carried this with me, he said quietly, for years. Every word memorized, every article understood, every amendment studied. Some would call it obsession. I call it responsibility. Because one day, when the world needed someone to speak truth, I would be ready. And today was that day. Gasps ran through the courtroom. Spectators whispered among themselves, eyes wide. Lawyers leaned forward, silent. Even the judge's hand, which had hovered above the gavel, fell to his side. The weight of the janitor's dedication, his life of quiet study, and his unwavering courage settled over the room like a heavy cloak. You have carried this knowledge in secret, the judge finally asked, voice soft. All this time, and yet, you never sought recognition? The janitor smiled faintly, a quiet, serene expression. Recognition is fleeting. Knowledge is eternal. Truth is more important than applause. Courage is more important than admiration. I have learned these things, lived by them, and now I act by them when the moment calls. The audience felt the weight of his words. Some whispered, tears glinting in their eyes. Some nodded slowly, moved not just by knowledge, but by the story behind it, the years of struggle, the lessons from parents, the unwavering dedication to justice. The judge leaned back slightly, pale and thoughtful. He had faced arrogance, laughter, and mockery earlier in the day, but now he faced something far greater, humility, courage, and integrity embodied in someone he had dismissed. For the first time, he realized that the world had far more to teach him than his robe, gavel, or title ever could. The janitor placed the notebook carefully on the bench, closing it gently. I am just a man, he said softly, but knowledge is a gift for all. Wisdom is a tool for all. And courage is a responsibility we all share. Remember this, because it matters more than anything else in this room. The courtroom remained silent, the silence deep, profound, and full of emotion. Spectators wiped tears quietly, lawyers exchanged amazed glances, and the judge's hand rested lightly on the gavel, unstruck. He had intended to challenge, to humiliate, to assert authority. Instead, he had witnessed a life, a journey, and a spirit that no title, no wealth, no mockery could diminish. A young reporter whispered to himself, he's extraordinary. Not because of words, but because of his life. Because of his heart. The janitor returned to his sweeping, slow and methodical,
but now with an aura that could not be ignored.
His life, his dedication, and his courage had transformed the room. Where mockery had once existed, there was now respect. Where laughter had ruled, there was now awe. And where arrogance had dominated, there was now humility and understanding. Even the judge, whose authority had been challenged in every imaginable way, felt a quiet shift. He realized that this janitor, this humble man who had lived a life of study and patience, had taught him something far greater than law alone: the power of dedication, the strength of character, and the true meaning of justice. The janitor's final words before returning fully to his corner echoed softly, yet carried to every corner of the room: do not underestimate anyone. Do not mock anyone. And never forget that the quiet, the humble, and the ordinary may hold the most extraordinary knowledge and courage of all. The courtroom stayed still. The energy had changed completely. The day's events had transformed mockery into revelation, arrogance into respect, and silence into awe. The janitor, once invisible, had become unforgettable. And the lesson of courage, truth, and integrity lingered in the air, long after the last whisper had faded. The courtroom was heavy with anticipation. For hours, silence and awe had held the room captive. The janitor had revealed knowledge, courage, and now the story of a lifetime of dedication that no one had expected. Even the judge, once full of arrogance and mockery, sat quietly, trying to comprehend the depth of what had unfolded. Every person in the room felt that something monumental had occurred, something that would not be forgotten. The judge finally rose, his movements slow and deliberate. The gavel remained untouched on the bench. For the first time that day, he did not speak to assert authority, but to acknowledge truth. His voice, steady yet tinged with humility, filled the courtroom. Today, he began, we have witnessed something rare. We have witnessed courage, knowledge, and wisdom displayed in a way that challenges every assumption we held. I must admit that I misjudged this man. I mocked him, underestimated him, and failed to see the depth of his understanding. For that, I apologize. A murmur ran through the audience. Lawyers and spectators alike felt a wave of emotion. The janitor's eyes remained calm, yet there was a faint glimmer of satisfaction, a quiet acknowledgement that his words and actions had made an impact. The judge continued, his tone more solemn now. This courtroom, which once rang with laughter at the expense of one man, must now ring with respect. Respect for knowledge, respect for dedication, and respect for courage. It is clear that wisdom is not confined to titles, uniforms, or social status. It is earned through study, perseverance, and integrity. And today, this lesson has been taught to us all by a man who has lived it every day of his life. The janitor lowered his broom slightly but did not move from his spot. The room seemed to lean forward collectively, as if every person wanted to absorb every word. The judge's admission had changed everything. Authority had been humbled, and justice, true, moral, and human, had taken its place. Effective immediately, the judge said, pausing for emphasis, this courtroom recognizes the knowledge, integrity, and courage displayed here. Let it serve as a reminder that respect must be given where it is due, regardless of occupation, appearance, or social standing. Let it be known that courage and truth cannot be silenced by mockery or arrogance. A soft, collective sigh of approval filled the room. Spectators exchanged nods, lawyers smiled quietly, and even court clerks felt a sense of honor to be present. The janitor, once invisible, now stood at the center of a room transformed by respect, truth, and admiration. The judge stepped closer, voice softer, almost personal. Sir, he said, I owe you more than words. Today, you have reminded us all of what truly matters. Not titles, not power, but integrity, knowledge, and courage. You have taught a lesson that will stay with everyone here for years to come. The janitor inclined his head slightly, a gesture of quiet acknowledgement. I am not here for thanks, he said simply. I am here because truth matters, because justice matters, and because no one should be dismissed simply because of their station in life. Knowledge is for everyone. Respect is for everyone. Courage is for everyone. The audience felt a deep emotional stir. Some blinked back tears. Others whispered softly, sharing the quiet realization that they had been part of something remarkable. This was not just a courtroom moment. It was a lesson in humility, courage, and human dignity. The judge cleared his throat, taking a deep breath. "Let it be recorded," he said, "that the actions and words of this man, the janitor, have set a standard for all of us. He has demonstrated mastery of knowledge, unwavering courage, and the moral clarity that we should all aspire to. He will be recognized in the official records of this court for the impact of his words and the example he has set." A hush fell over the courtroom. The janitor's eyes glimmered faintly, but he did not boast, did not celebrate. He simply returned to his sweeping, slow and methodical, yet now every movement carried the weight of acknowledgement and respect. A young reporter, unable to contain himself, whispered to his colleague, This is incredible. He's a janitor, and yet he has humbled a judge, inspired a courtroom, and reminded everyone what true courage is." The other nodded, eyes wide. "I've never seen anything like this in my life. He will be remembered." The judge leaned back slightly, letting the words sink in, and finally nodded. "Yes," he said softly, almost to himself, "he will be remembered. Not because of his title, not because of a position, but because of his life, his dedication, and his unwavering pursuit of truth and justice." The courtroom seemed to release a collective breath, the tension dissolving into respect, awe, and quiet admiration. Spectators whispered to each other, lawyers exchanged knowing glances, and even clerks smiled quietly, feeling honored to have witnessed such a moment. The janitor, who had begun the day as a figure of mockery, had become a symbol of integrity and courage. A young child in the audience, holding her father's hand, looked up and whispered softly, "I want to be like him when I grow up." Her father nodded, tears in his eyes. "We all do, sweetheart. We all do." The janitor paused, looking around the room one last time. His eyes met the judge's, and in that moment, there was mutual recognition, a quiet, profound understanding that respect had been earned and that courage had triumphed. Finally, he returned fully to his work, sweeping the floor, but the room's perception of him had shifted forever. No longer just a janitor, he was a teacher, a symbol, a quiet hero whose life and actions had touched everyone present. The mockery was gone. The laughter was gone. Only respect remained, steady, deep, and undeniable. The judge rose once more, voice calm but filled with sincerity. "Let it be known," he said, "that today we have learned a lesson that no gavel, no robe, and no courtroom hierarchy can teach. Respect must be earned, knowledge must be valued, and courage must be acknowledged wherever it exists. This man, the janitor, has demonstrated all of these, and for that, he will forever be honored in this court." The courtroom erupted, not with laughter, not with mockery, but with quiet, heartfelt applause. Spectators stood, some with tears in their eyes, lawyers nodded respectfully, and even the judge allowed himself a faint, humble smile. The janitor, still sweeping, paused to look around once more. He allowed himself a small, serene smile. His message had been delivered. His life, his dedication, and his courage had been recognized. And in that moment, the courtroom, the people, and even the judge had learned a profound truth: greatness is not determined by title, wealth, or status, it is determined by knowledge, integrity, and the courage to stand firm in the face of mockery and doubt. As the courtroom slowly emptied, people whispered, shared stories, and reflected on the extraordinary events of the day. The janitor remained, quietly finishing his work, a figure of humility and heroism. And though he cleaned floors, his actions had elevated him far above anyone's expectations. In the end, respect had triumphed over arrogance, courage had outshone mockery, and truth had reshaped the hearts and minds of everyone present. The janitor, once overlooked, had become unforgettable not because he demanded it, but because he had earned it, quietly, patiently, and powerfully. And the courtroom would never forget him.